A new week just started, and Bitcoin is still consolidating between the 30,000 and 30,500 levels, according to the charts. Yet, there are still short-term profitable opportunities for you to grab if you pay attention for a few minutes. Bitcoin wants to break to the upside, creating slightly higher highs, but even with all the good news we got last week, it was still not enough for it to happen. Yet Gareth and Ben Cowan both are seeing levels where you can buy more Bitcoin according to the Bitcoin dominance chart, and even some good short-term opportunities in the altcoins. So check this out.
This is that trend line here, which is around 40, just under 49%, 48.5 is where I have my trend line. So there's definitely a possibility of that. And again, there's precedent to be set from other charts. The only thing that kind of gives you a range here, which is this 50% to 48.5%, is that if you look at the recent pullbacks, like for instance, here, right, you had a sideways consolidation and you never got back to that level, right? So, and in other situations, if you go back on charts, you kind of have the same situation. I'm looking back here. So here, right? So you had this pivot high breakout right here. You kind of kissed it there, but you didn't quite hit it, and then you consolidated before the next big move up in dominance. Here, though, you could argue, I mean, again, does this, I don't know, you know, it's tricky. It's one of those things where as a technician, I know that it could do either one. And so if you're someone that's interested in buying Bitcoin, you want to start to inch in at this level, and then you always leave room to add if it goes lower, if the dominance comes lower into that level. But I think the one thing I will say is that I would be very surprised if dominance broke back below the previous consolidation. That would be very unusual from a chart perspective, as well as from a Bitcoin historic perspective.
We've seen the dominance bounce off the 100-day moving average, and that's actually now above that sort of that range high, at least that I have drawn, around 48.9%. What's interesting that I find here is, and again, I remind people of this as well, is that you can have the dominance of Bitcoin go up even if Bitcoin USD does not go up. And actually, in 2018, this pullback right here sort of marked the transition from a Bitcoin USD rally towards sort of like a sideways move with a slightly bearish bias on it. And it was actually during that move, the dominance went from 50 to 60%, where Bitcoin basically, I think, if memory serves me correctly, Bitcoin pulled back from 8K to 6K, but during that time, the altcoin market dropped very, very quickly. So I think that is something we have to remind ourselves of. Sometimes dominance goes up not because Bitcoin's rallying, but because it's actually going back down.
Just briefly overviewing the Ripple scenario is that, okay, so Ripple essentially won. I think there's some caveats there that people were glossing over, that it wasn't a full win. There was still some situations where the judge said, well, that would be a security if you're selling directly to institutions and so forth. But the key is that and I've said this from the very start of this decision, is the SEC is not going to just lay down and die, right? They're not going to be like, oh, well, we lost, too bad. They're going to appeal, and that appeal process is probably going to take 1 to 2 years. And so you have a scenario now where, as much as we wanted this finality where it's like, okay, alts are not securities, we're now going to have to wait 1 year to 2 years to get that finality, which means that institutions are not going to be like heavily investing in these things, right? So it brings us back to that idea that, okay, well, they probably, if we get a spot ETF, they probably would start to heavily invest in Bitcoin, which goes with the whole dominance side of things as well. So I think that's just something that investors, they get so excited, and I don't blame them. I mean, that move on Ripple was incredible. Although, to be honest, I thought it would go more, maybe because it wasn't a full win and there's the appeal process. But for me, it's still this kind of pseudo gray now, with maybe a little bit more clarity, but not enough to really release the Kraken, as they say,
So Bitcoin dominance can create some pullbacks where you will find opportunities to buy more Bitcoin at lower prices. Yet even though there's no full clarity on altcoins, they are likely getting way lower soon. Here are some quick opportunities Gareth is finding out.
Yeah, and this brings up a really good point, right? So I remember a couple weeks ago talking to you about how, even though I believed that Bitcoin dominance was ultimately going to head higher, there was opportunities for kind of a snapback on some of the altcoins. And so for instance, I had members at Verified Investing Crypto. We were long Cardano with this beautiful little wedge, and then as it popped into this area, that's where we started to unload, right? So it's the swing trade ability to kind of just be in and be out and understand the bigger macro picture, but but you can see what's happened. I mean, Cardano's come right back in. Now, interestingly enough, what this does for me, at least, is this potentially brings up a opportunity here. And I'm just looking for some chart things here. Like, so for me, this now becomes, let me do it again here. This becomes support right here, right? So you have this trend line and this trend line, which were this was former resistance. When resistance breaks, it now becomes support. And so for me, and this is again strictly on a swing trade basis, I would potentially be interested in unloading or excuse me, buying Cardano again back at around 29 cents, give or take. And the same thing for Matic, right? I mean, these things were quick poppers. Now it's retracing. So now you have some opportunities on the way back down where you can play. But again, I think it's important to just caveat this for everyone watching that we're not talking, at least I'm not talking about long-term holds. These are make 10%, 15%, be out of the type of trading opportunities.
Here's Gareth and Ben's latest analysis of the current Bitcoin prices.
And I do want to just point out too, is that just with Bitcoin dominance going up, again, just to reiterate, it doesn't necessarily guarantee Bitcoin's going to go up from here, right? So Bitcoin could drop 20%, alts could drop 40%, right? And then dominance still goes up in that situation. So just to be aware, and the only reason I bring this up too is if I just flip to my chart, is that there's been some, even though we're still technically stuck in a sideways consolidation, which is usually bullish for Bitcoin, I'm struggling with some factors here, right? So we keep on making these attempts and making even slightly higher highs, and then something's causing Bitcoin to kind of reverse super quickly. Like this candle right here technically fits a topping tail, and topping tail in technical analysis is a bearish indicator. Here we had this beautiful close. It was like the first close or the highest close we've seen. And the next day, Bitcoin fell right back down, negating that entire move up, which again is not confidence building. It's not a good signal for Bitcoin. And then we've just gone sideways. And you can see, actually, I put in a channel now. There's a pretty clear sideways upsloping channel that's kind of keeping price in this range. So I think just from my perspective is that you have to admit that this sideways chop after a move up is usually bullish, but it's not been an easy success breakout situation for Bitcoin. And I do wonder at some point if this thing can't break out, path of least resistance is
my general view is that we'll spend the year between 12 and 35K. The longer we go into this, though, I think the harder it becomes to justify, because I mean, normally in the pre-halving year, right, what normally happens is we spend half the year going up and half the year going down. And the last two times, in fact, we had a pre-halving year of 2011 and 2019, and in both of those cases, like 5 of the first 6 months were green, 2011 and 2019, and those were both pre-halving years, and then 5 of the last 6 months were red in those years. So I think that, and again, normally Bitcoin in the pre-halving year, normally it finds some type of significant top about halfway through, right? Like again, if you just sort of overlay 2015, you can see there was a top here. Like just look at it with respect to 2023, right? Like the same top before ultimately a double bottom. In 2019, we saw this top out in June, and in 2011, it topped out in June as well. So June, July tends to be a significant path for Bitcoin to find a local top. With regard to this is how, if Bitcoin USD goes down and the dominance goes up, that means the altcoins get wrecked more. Or if Bitcoin rallies, I think it just leaves the altcoin market behind, right? So either way, it just seems like the dominance is going to go higher. If you look at, there's this indicator I really like to look at. It's called the altcoin season index. And this is like a 30-day moving average. Like if I take a 30-day moving average off it, it's a little bit noisier, but if you apply moving average to it, you can kind of see that there's been 3 times in history. So we just hit like around that 5 or 6 level. There's been 3 times in history where we've gone to that level, right? So December of 2020, September of 2018, and October of 2017, November of 2017. So 3 times previously. Now, 2 of those times when we came out of Bitcoin season, it was the altcoin market exploded, right? 2 of those times. But here's the thing, like there's one time where we came out of that and then altcoins got wrecked, and that was in 2018. And I look for a confluence in other indicators. So like what's similar today with 2020, 2017, and 2018? Like what does today most closely match, right, between those 3 outcomes? And if you look at things like the social risk, which we talked about, right? 2017, higher lows, right? 2020, higher lows. 2018 was lower lows, right? So the one time where altcoins got wrecked coming out of Bitcoin season, it was when we were putting in lower lows, which is actually what's going on today, right? So I still, yeah, as much as I would love to just join in on the fun, right, and just say, put the moon goggles on and just say that they're gonna go up. It's just like I can't get past this. Like, who's the marginal buyer if retail is still capitulating out of the altcoin market? And then that's ultimately what I look at. And then you also look at total 3, the altcoin market, and you look at similarities between today and 2020. I mean, there's not a lot. I mean, in 2020, total 3 was trending up above the 20-week SMA. Today, it's still getting rejected by it. 2017, it was above it. 2018, it was getting rejected by it. So until the market definitively proves the dominance thesis wrong, I still think the altcoins are going to be struggling for a while.
I just keep on thinking about, well, where's the big money, right? And the big money is not going to be, I mean, you got a spot ETF, which is going to draw, think about it like a magnet. The spot ETF basically has to be approved by the SEC, which is going to give semi-green light to Bitcoin for institutions. They're not getting that green light with altcoins at this point. Doesn't mean it won't happen in a few years, but as of now, it certainly does seem like that's the place to be.
3 other experts say the bull run for Bitcoin is starting, and their secrets charts show everything clearly. You may want to check this video next to understand their predictions and how you should position yourself to profit from these major moves.